Shabbat Shalom. We just read these famous words from Isaiah. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, V'yomer Elohechem, says your God. Comforts my nation, comforts my people. On Monday evening, as we gathered for Tisha B'Av, our community, B'nai Israel, Ohab Shalom, Kol Rina, we were reminded that we're actually on Tisha B'Av prohibited from studying Torah. The one day a year, the only book of the Tanakh that we're allowed and permitted to read. Anybody? Well, besides Eicha, which we're commanded to. But for study's sake, Job. The only part of the Tanakh that we're permitted to study on Tisha B'Av is the book of Job, which speaks of suffering as a test, endless and senseless pain and suffering. We're supposed to study Torah to bring us comforts, to help us get up from our grief, and we're told we can't do that on Tisha B'Av. Instead, we have to sit in that grief, sit in that state of mourning, because we understand that when we are in mourning, Torah doesn't suffice. Words fail. So what do we do instead? We're just present. But we're not present alone. Traditionally, when you would walk into a Shiva home, we weren't supposed to speak. Now Shiva has become a social gathering of sorts. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's when we come together, we distract somebody in their state of mourning. We try to bring joy. But traditionally, you would walk into a Shiva home and you would sit in silence. And you would wait for the Avel, for the mourner to speak, and then you would respond. Because we understand that there are no words we can say when we are in mourning, when somebody else is in mourning, to make them feel better. The only thing that brings somebody comfort, any sense of comfort, is a reminder that we aren't alone. And so Isaiah says, on behalf of God, Nachamu Ami. Comfort not just a single person, but a reminder to bring comfort to a people. A reminder, I would argue, that we only find comforts in peoplehood. There's a reason that we say Kaddish in Minyan. There's a reason that we surround ourselves. There's a reason that we're taught jokingly that you actually can't be Jewish on a deserted island. Because we need to be with people. And ultimately, that's where we find our comfort. In our Parsha, we read, as we said earlier, two of our most famous aspects of our Torah. Aseret HaDibrot, we read again the second iteration of the Ten Commandments. And then we also read Shema and Ve'ahavta. Right, these words, these odd words where we're commanded to love God. How can you be commanded to love another being? We love because we grow up with our family members, because we're raised by them, because we share a bedroom with a sibling, because we fight and bicker in the back seat and we hold on to those. That's a different type of love. We love our partners, our spouses. It's a love, a spark that developed over time. But to be commanded to love God with all of our hearts, we find that love also in community. I was given a task once in rabbinical school, seminary at JTS. Somebody walks up to you and says, I want to be Jewish. Give them the elevator pitch. for what it means to be Jewish. And it was a way to introduce us to this famous story of Hillel and Shammai, right? This all regel echad on one foot. Hillel says, in essence, his own version of Ahavta l'recha kamocha, to love your neighbor as yourself, although that's not what he says. He says, that what is hurtful to you, do not do to another. But our teacher suggested that the elevator pitch of what it means to be a Jew is Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Which we often translate, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. But the argument made that day was not because Judaism at its essence is about monotheism. One of the reasons that we find Shema in the book of Deuteronomy is because we actually don't see any concept of monotheism in the Torah until the book of Deuteronomy. Because historically, if the book of Deuteronomy is introduced much later, not until the destruction of the first temple, we actually don't see that in history, that idea. The first 4 books of the Torah are focused more on the idea that the Israelites' God, this tetragrammaton, this Yud He Vav He God, is more powerful than other gods. It's only in the book of Deuteronomy are we introduced to this idea of Adonai Echad, this one God. But this elevator speech, this idea that the Shema is what it means to be a Jew, is not because of monotheism. It's because we need to read the text differently. We need to understand that when we're reading the Shema, Shema Yisrael, pay attention, people of Israel. Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. That God is our God, and God, not one, is one God, but God is Echad, the individual God. The idea that we connect in this brit, in this covenant, as a community, Eloheinu, and as an individual, Echad. But we are taught first Adonai Eloheinu and then Adonai Echad because, as I said, you can't be a Jew on a deserted island, because there are certain prayers we cannot say without a minyan, because we need community first in order to get to Adonai Echad, in order to have that personal revelation experience, in order to have that one-on-one experience with God, in order to wrestle, to see God in that burning bush, we first need to make space for community. It's a reminder of the importance of community. Many of us in our community will be going down to Shabbaton on our congregational retreats next Shabbat. Don't worry, we'll still have services here to build community, to strengthen community. But it's also a reminder of the importance now more than ever of community, of peoplehood, of achdut, of unity, the idea that we can strengthen our own personal relationships if we don't strengthen the relationship of community and God as well. And so, as each of us mourn the destruction, the pain, the suffering that we hear, that we read in the book of Eicha, the book of Lamentations that we read on Monday evening, a pain and suffering that is so gruesome, graphic, brutal, pain and suffering that has been all too familiar this past year. Pain and suffering that speaks of the individuals, that speaks of the mother holding her lifeless child, Eicha says. It focuses on the individual, and yet Isaiah doesn't tell God, or Isaiah doesn't speak for God and say, comfort that individual in their individual mourning. Isaiah says, comfort the people as a people, as a community, because it's only ultimately as a community that will find comfort. It's only ultimately as a community that we're able to get up from Shiva. It's only ultimately as a community that we're able, Adonai Eloheinu, to strengthen our relationship with God so that Adonai Echad, we can strengthen our own personal relationships as well. The coming weeks, we'll enter the month of Elul, start this process of entering and preparing for the Yamim Noraim, and this process of Chashbon HaNefesh, of doing introspection and self-reflection and trying to strengthen our own individual relationship with God for the year to come. But the Shema reminds us, and I would argue our Haftorah reminds us even more, that we can't do that individual work, that difficult, often impossible, but necessary work, till we do the work as a community to strengthen our relationship to one another as well. Only then, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, that we as a people will find comforts. May we find comforts in each other, in one another, and only then find comfort in God. Shabbat Shalom.